Hi, I'm Stephen Feuerstein, and I write practically perfect PLSQL. So let's take a look at the ORA-06502 error, the value error exception. It's a very common error that PL/SQL developers will encounter, hopefully in development, not so much in production. But it's a good thing to be very familiar with what causes it, how to fix it. And of course, the best place to start is the database Oracle Error Messages Manual. Let's take a look. So in the Oracle Help Center, Oracle Documentation, look up the Database Error Messages Manual. And what you'll find are long series or categorizations of Oracle errors by number. So the ORA are the standard database errors. Then you'll also find PLS, which are the PL/SQL compile errors, and the PLWs, which are the PL/SQL warnings. Well, we're looking for the ORA-6502, so we dive into that category, and we find this, ORA-6502, PL/SQL numeric or value error string. So what's the cause? An arithmetic numeric string conversion or constraint error occurred. So essentially there's some sort of constraint on the piece of data you're working with or changing the value of. And we blew up that constraint. We violated the constraint, and Oracle throws the general value error exception as a result. What do you do about it? Change the data value being assigned or change your code to avoid this kind of error. Now let's take a look at some samples of code. Let's take a look at a classic example. Here's a very simple block of code. I'm going to declare a single string variable, maximum length 5, and I'll assign a value to it. Looks pretty basic. What could go wrong? And when I run my code, well, a lot can go wrong, including the 6502 error. Now, why has this happened? Well, first of all, notice the error message. The 6502 error is interesting in one particular way compared to a lot of other error messages. There is the main error message, numeric or value error. And then there's this subtext, essentially the context, or more specifically, what happened. In this case, character string buffer too small. And that does tell us exactly what the problem is. I declared a string maximum length 5. I assigned a value 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 to it. That's too big, right? 6 characters. And that blew it up. So I tried to stuff too large a value into too small a container. One of the classic ways that 6502 occurs. What do you do about it? Well, you can certainly make your declaration bigger. I can say, let's make it as big as possible, 32,767. And by the way, that will not cause you to use more memory. In fact, it could cause you to use less memory because the memory is allocated dynamically as needed. But often what you don't want to do is get into the habit of just declaring everything to be the biggest size possible. What you want to do is analyze the way that variable is being used or where the data comes from, and then correlate your declaration to that. So for example, if this value is coming from the employee last name column in the table, then the best thing to do would be to use an anchoring. Declare this variable to be of that type. And then assuming that the values always come from that column in the table, you're never going to get the value error exception. So that's one way of getting around the too large a value for too small a container. Let's keep going though with some more examples of what you might run into with 6502s and how to deal with them. Now, what I also wanted to show you next is how you can trap for this exception specifically. So value error is one of those exceptions that is given a name inside Oracle. So inside the standard package of PLSQL, there's a definition of the value error exception, and it's associated with -6502. So I've got the same code that I had before, my too small string for too large a value, but I'm going to trap the exception by name, and I'll display the error message or the format error stack. Run my code, the anonymous block completed, and our output is the same that you saw before. Character string buffer too small for 6502. So it's the same message, it's the same error, but it's just important to know that you can actually trap this exception by name. Now, of course, I could have said, when others run the same code and see the same result. And that's certainly a legitimate thing to do. In terms of best practices, if you know that you're likely to raise a certain error, it's an expected error in your code, then it really does make a lot of sense to put in an exception handler specifically for it, because you're saying essentially to anybody managing that code later, I thought about this, it might occur, here's what we should do about it. So you can be as specific as possible. All right, let's keep going. So let's take a look at this piece of code, this block, and see, will it raise a value error exception? I declare a number. I assign it the value of 10. Now, then I've got a string with a maximum size 5. I suppose at a glance you might say, well, whoa, we've got a problem here because 10 is bigger than 5. Well, it's true 10 is bigger than 5, but that's apples and oranges. When I run this code, no exception has occurred because the number 10 is being implicitly converted to a string in this assignment. And the string version of 10 is just 2 characters, 1, 0. So that's obviously not greater than 5. No value error exception. Great. I bet you knew that. But let's take another look at the same sort of situation in which I'm relying on implicit conversions. So now I'm declaring my number. I've assigned it the value of 100,000. And then I'm going to assign that number to my string. Now again, Oracle will implicitly convert the number to the string, and the string becomes a 6-character long 10000. So this will in fact cause that value error exception because that has 6 significant digits, and that is one too many for a string whose maximum length is 5. And there we see the error. So in general, you want to watch out for implicit conversions like this, and either explicitly convert or take a look at your code and even try to figure out why would I be doing a number to string conversion here. It doesn't make sense. And the other type of conversion is even trickier or more likely to cause you problems. What if I've got a string and I want to assign it to a number? So in this block of code, I declare a string, maximum length 5. I assign the value ABC to it. Less than 5? No problem. It's a string. That's not going to give me any errors. And then I'm going to assign that string value to the number. So Oracle will say, no problem. I know how to implicitly convert a string to a number. I'll essentially do a 2-number on it. But when it tries to do a 2-number on it, as you can see, ABC, not a valid number. And so we get another value error exception. But this time, notice, the sub-message is different. So it's the same error number, 6502, the same main error message, numeric or value error. But now it's telling us you had a character to number conversion error. Now this is a really nice addition to the error message because in the old days, before we had this bifurcation, these 2 different sub-messages, we'd get the general numeric or value error message, but it wouldn't really guide us as to what to look for, making it trickier to sort out. Now we get a really nice piece of advice about what to look for in our code. Of course, in many cases you're not going to see literals like this staring you at the face, and you can say, whoa, Stephen, that's not a number, why are you doing that? It's going to be a function that's returning a value or something like that. So the values are often hidden away, and it can be kind of difficult to ferret out why the string that was being generated by the function that was being used in the assignment to the number contained non-numeric values, but at least you know that was the source of the problem. Cruising right along. Now you can get the same kind of problem when you're getting data from the SQL layer, from tables in the database, and putting them into variable values. So let's take a look at that. In this case, I've got my string maximum length 15. I'm getting the last name and the first name out of the employees table, putting them together with concatenation. And then I'm putting them into my string for a given employee ID. When I run this code, you can see the result looks just the same as if I was doing it all in native PL SQL. Character string buffer too small. And the problem is that I'm taking this expression, which for employee ID 201 is something like 20 characters long, trying to stuff it into my too small string. So all of this stuff is the SQL that's generating the value. But in the end, you're putting it into a string. It's no different from doing an assignment. It's the same kind of error. Okay, what do you do about that? As I mentioned before, in this particular case, you probably want to be looking at some kind of percent type if you can, if it's appropriate. So now what I've done is change my declaration of LString to be employee's last name percent type. Now, that's good in the sense that I've anchored my declaration back to something else instead of hard coding it. But it probably doesn't really help me too much here because, as you can see, I've typed it back to last name only, but I'm concatenating these 2 things together. So I run my code. But now work this time. We didn't exceed the maximum value for that particular combination. But when you do your percent types, you want to make sure that they actually correlate to what's being filled up for other elements, for other employees. We could easily exceed past that limitation on last name, which is set to 25, so it didn't hit it, and run into a value error exception. Now, another thing you can also do is take advantage of the compile time warning system of the PL SQL compiler to give you feedback on your code in which it might be generating 6502 errors when you run it. Oracle can't always tell when that's the case, but in some cases it can. So what I'm going to do is, first of all, execute this session command. I'm going to turn on PL/SQL warnings. So I'm going to enable all warnings. Execute. And then I'm going to compile this program. Now, this program has no compilation errors. I'm creating a procedure, declaring a string, assigning a string to it. But if you take a close look, you'll see that I'm assigning a string of more than 5 characters. At compile time, from the standpoint of syntax, perfectly legitimate procedure. But we can look at it and say, well, that's no good. That's going to raise an error. And in fact, if you have warnings turned on, so can Oracle. So now, even though it tells me that my procedure compiled just fine, it also tells me in the warning section that an operation will raise an exception. So what Oracle is telling me that it found a situation on line 5, so the warning is line 5 right here, in which it's predicting if you run this code, you're likely to get an exception. Some kind of error is going to happen. Now, it doesn't tell us which one. Sometimes it's a zero divide. Sometimes it's a value error exception. But Oracle will flag this for us as telling us we've got a problem. So I do encourage you to enable warnings when you're compiling your code so that you can get this additional information. It's not always identifying real errors like this one. Usually it's identifying opportunities for improving the quality of your code. But in this case, at least under some circumstances, it will flag that scenario for you and save you a little bit of trouble and headache. So I hope that's been a useful explanation of the 6502 error, helping you understand where it might occur, how to resolve it, and happy PL/SQL coding, and hopefully very few 6502 errors in your time with PLSQL.